Welcome, Traveler's Blueprint community. I am Elliot Shibley, and here with me, as always, is the equanimous Robert Demena.
Equanimous? What does that mean?
Equanimous is calm and composed.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. Sometimes.
No, most of the time. I don't know if I've ever seen you get really angry or, really frustrated with something that you didn't lose your composure.
Well, I have, but yeah, thank you. I try to keep my composure, so I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so this guest today is a really awesome one. So he runs the YouTube page known as the History Underground. And essentially what he does, he travels around the United States and Europe, retracing the steps of some of the most significant wars and events in our history. And today we discussed his time traveling through France and Belgium, following in the footsteps of American and I think Allied soldiers during the D-Day invasion and the Battle of the Bulge. I think that's what we primarily talked about. But
Yep, and some of the stuff from Band of Brothers.
yeah, so a lot of it from Band of Brothers. So if you're familiar with that HBO show, we got into Easy Company and things like that. And he's incredibly knowledgeable and passionate about history. And he has a really great way of articulating that information to you as a listener, as a follower of his YouTube page. And so he did not disappoint. It was an incredible conversation. Lots of history here, lots of information to break down. And so, we hope you enjoy it.
And before we get into the full episode, I do want to break down some of the stuff we have going on behind the scenes. One of the most exciting things is that we now have our Traveler's Blueprint Become Your Own Travel Agent tutorials. It's a 5-part series broken down into various topics such as researching restaurants, blogs, booking airfare, learning how to navigate your destination, being a more thoughtful traveler, which includes social norms and safety, and how to build your own itinerary. And that is available for pre-order right now at 50% off, so for $25, and it is only available for those of you listening. It is not marketed anywhere else. So please consider doing that. We think it is really beneficial to anyone listening. I know, had I not known Bob prior to this, I would absolutely have gone through this tutorial, and it's really cool. There's a little surprise for you at the end. So next, we have our website newsletter we send out every week, which gives you an update on our current guest, our next guest, and a previous episode, kind of a highlight reel. And if you sign up for that, you get a free travel cheat sheet. And then we also have our consulting services where you can sit down with Bob and go over your trip. He will either help you plan your entire trip out or pieces of it. And similarly, we will help you find cheaper airfare for a reduced price. And we don't ask for much except for a portion of what we save you. And then we have our Traveler Roundtable series, which we have shifted to the last Monday of each month. And that is a panel type discussion where we look at different topics affecting the travel industry. And then lastly, if you are part of the travel realm and are a travel influencer yourself, please consider signing up to join our Travel Roundtable discussions. And lastly, the best way to get in touch with us, the best way to follow us and learn what we're doing is to check us out on Instagram, on Facebook, and for YouTube. You can comment, you can message us, you can interact with us and our guests with videos and pictures. It's pretty awesome. So without further introduction, let's get into the episode with JD and talk about the History Underground.
Welcome to the Traveler's Blueprint. Start designing your next adventure.
JD, welcome to the Traveler's Blueprint podcast.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
We really appreciate you coming on today. So I want to give context to how you and I became in contact with one another, and it was through. So I'm going cycling back through a World War II kick. I've always loved the history of World War II, but now I guess sort of with the lockdown, my wife and I went back and started watching Band of Brothers. We finished
Yes.
Band of Brothers, and now we're into the Pacific, which we're almost done the Pacific. So you might have to give me recommendations on where to go next. But I finished the episode on the Battle of the Bulge, and as soon as I got done, I just couldn't believe the fight, the battle that happened in the Ardennes Forest.
The Ardennes. Yeah, the Ardennes
Ardennes
Forest.
Forest. And so what I did, naturally, I went to the internet to just learn as much as I could about that battle and kind of bring context to the episode that I watched. And I stumbled upon your YouTube page, and you visited the Ardennes, and I watched this video of you walking through this forest where this epic, brutal battle took place, and you jumped down into a foxhole and you sat, lowered your camera down and gave a visible view of the tree line. And dude, when I saw that, man, I told you this in the email, but it gave me chills. Even saying it, I'm feeling it. It was incredible. And so I had to reach out to you. And now here we are. So before we get into it, I want to just give you the opportunity to give your own story, how you got into being this historical traveler, why you love history, and bring us up to speed on essentially your YouTube platform and what you're doing.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I've been interested in history. Oh my gosh, as long as I can remember. So I guess I come from a family of history or storytellers on both sides of my family. So my grandpa on my dad's side, he was in World War II and served in the Aleutian Island chain up in Alaska.
Mhm.
And then my grandpa on my mom's side, he was in the Korean War and grew up during the Great Depression and things like that. So growing up, my brother and I, we were constantly pressing my grandpa for stories about his time in the service and what things were like during the Great Depression. And then in addition to that, my dad, he grew up during the height of the Cold War, um, and his big interest was like space travel and the space race and moon landings and things like that. Um, so growing up, I was always watching documentaries with him and things like that. So I kind of had a bug for history at a very early age. Um, as far as the YouTube channel goes, uh, the YouTube channel is a complete accident. Um, I I'm in the education world, um, and I've tried to travel, whenever I could, whenever time and money allowed. I've been fortunate to have gone to some pretty interesting places, in Central America, South Africa, different places like that. And there are a few places that I went where I just recorded a few things and brought it back to show my students to kind of bring it into the lesson and just be like a virtual field trip in some way. And and they said, "Hey, you need to start a YouTube channel." And I thought, I don't know if anybody would really be interested in watching, any of the places that I go, but yeah, sure. I've also got a background in video production,
That helps.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So in addition to, the education background, I've also got the video editing and production background. I've done a lot of work in the outdoor industry and still do. So anyway, I just kind of married those two things together and started filming these places, and it's had this snowball effect, and kind of steadily grew. And then I guess it was in late April or May of this year, um, I got an email from YouTube, and it said, "Congratulations, you've been named as a YouTube creator on the rise." I was like, "Oh, okay, well, that's kind of nice." I had no idea what it meant. Apparently, that means something because the channel exploded after that. It went on their trending page for a day or something like that. But anyway, yeah, it's been really encouraging to me, just to see the interest that people have in history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to give some context to our listeners. Your YouTube page, which I don't think we've mentioned yet, is
Oh, yeah.
called The History Underground.
Yeah.
And you just breached, today is November 8th, 2020, and you just breached 80,000 subscribers with over 5 million views. And you started this less than or about a year and a half ago in May of 2019.
Yes. Yeah, complete accident, like I said.
Well, I'm glad that you did this because your videos are incredibly informative. And something that I want to ask you before we maybe get into the history is your practices for understanding and learning and being able to articulate the history of the locations you're visiting. Now, oftentimes you're walking, and I don't know what type of camera you have or if it's just your phone, but you kind of extend your arm. And whether you're walking on Omaha Beach or you're walking through France or somewhere in the United States, you're kind of just moving along, and there's just something very real about it and authentic. But the way you explain the history is really well, and it really helps me, someone who has rudimentary knowledge on the history, put those battles and put that information into context. So what's your preparation method?
So as far as the style, if I were being tasked with creating a documentary for History Channel or something like that, I wouldn't film it in the same way that I do the YouTube channel. Um, what I wanted for the channel was it to be kind of experiential, to where even if you couldn't go to these places, it's kind of like you're just kind of hanging out with me along the way. Uh, so really, in a decent number of the videos, the viewer is seeing things at the same time that I am, um, which can be dangerous because it can make me look like a complete moron. But and then in other cases, like you've mentioned the series where I went to Normandy, there was an insane amount of preparation that I put into that. Um, so yeah, and that's you'll notice on the episodes I'll switch back and forth. Sometimes I'm pointing the camera at myself, which, by the way, my gosh, it is the most awkward thing in the world for me to do. I feel like such an idiot whenever I do it.
It's a shameless act.
Oh man, yeah. I'm approaching 100 episodes of the History Traveler series, and I still just feel like a complete goober every time I do it. But anyway, and then I'll switch back to where I'm behind the camera, so it's kind of bringing the viewer into the experience. Um,
Yeah, I first of all, I know what you mean. And even there was a part where I think when you landed in France, I was watching you and you're walking through the airport, and I was like, ah, good for him, because I feel awkward doing that. I'm not a fan of, Elliot, when we went to Peru and I tried to do that and say, hey, here I am. It's awkward and you feel weird kind of doing that in front of people, but I think it's becoming more socially acceptable now. People don't really care anymore, but it's still, there's an awkwardness to it.
yeah,
There's not like a look at that fool over there vibe.
It's almost more common to see it now than not, in a way, at certain landmarks and locations.
oh
Yeah.
man, I've had people laugh at me and
Uh-huh.
snicker and everything like that, and just like you kind of have to get into your head, like, okay, that's one person. I'm never going to see them again. I don't even
Right.
know them.
Right,
Well,
right.
this is
Yeah.
something that I've said to Elliot that we kind of try to live by. You have to do something like this and put yourself out there. You kind of just have to check humility at the door,
Yep.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
it. That's it. You can't think about it. If you think about it, it's going to tear you down, and at that,
Yeah.
what good is that going to do?
Yep.
All right. So, Elliot, unless you had something, I was going to try to get into World War II.
Let's get into World War II.
All right.
It's one of my favorite topics to review. And I also had a World War II phase, Bob. But I was more interested not in the Western Front, but the Eastern Front, because one of my favorite books growing up, and I shouldn't say favorite, one that I found really interesting was Left for Dead, which was about the USS Indianapolis after it dropped one of the nukes off in
Mm,
Japan, and it got torpedoed on its way home. And I think 90% of the crew had died, mostly not from drowning or the impact of the torpedo, but from being left out at sea because it was a secret mission and not being able to be found and then being eaten alive by sharks. I think of the 400 that survived the actual attack, I think only 20 or 30 made it out alive on the lifeboats.
yeah. Yeah. It's a terribly tragic story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a lot of these stories are, and so let's go into Europe. So obviously, I
Sure.
think Normandy. I think France is for at least the American perspective of World War II, plays a huge role. Can you just talk us through, I guess, your experience in France, however you want to begin?
Yeah, sure. Um, so I've led a couple of different tours over in Europe. Um, like with high school age students, kind of getting them into travel and getting them on the ground where these historical events happen, things like that. Um, and one of those tours, we went to Paris and Normandy and London. So that was actually my first experience, in France and going to the beaches of Normandy. Unfortunately, on that trip, we we had an inexperienced tour guide, and it, I don't want to get into the details of it, but it really kind of soured the experience a little bit. So I'd always wanted to go back. Um, and anyway, was um, getting prepared to do another one of these student tours, and the tour company that I was working with had this program where they were flying tour leaders over, and it's kind of like a conference of sorts. And anyway, it was in Paris, so my wife and I went, did that, and then planned like an extra 5 days that we were going to be in France and in Belgium. And that's what gave me the opportunity to kind of go back and um, really kind of experience it the way that I wanted to. Um, I'm not sure if that really answers your question. Um,
It does, yeah. And so, you're in Paris, and did you
mhm.
immediately go to Omaha Beach? And what was your route?
So we landed in Paris, and we were in Paris for about 2 days. Now, as you watch those episodes, um, they actually go out of order from what my actual route was. I show all of the Normandy videos first, and then all of the stuff from Belgium that's like Battle of the Bulge, some of those sites. Um, the reason for that being is that there was a massive storm that was sweeping through the Normandy area of France, and they were getting torrential. They were going to be getting torrential rains that they hadn't seen in, like, according to the people that I talked to afterwards, they hadn't seen anything like it in years. It would have completely ruined that part of the trip. We'd have just sat inside and watched it rain outside. So I
Right.
ended up having to make some quick adjustments. So anyway, the basic breakdown is we were in Paris for a couple of days, and then we drove up to um, Bastogne. Whenever the video that you mentioned where I was in Foix, Americans call it Foy, but where I go to all those different foxholes and everything. Um, we had left Paris at about noon, got there around 4, so I had a couple hours there. Um, and then the next day, spent some time up around Aachen, went to Henri Chapelle Cemetery, um, and went to another place called Saint Vith, where a big battle took place. Um, and then from there, went back down into France, um, spent a day in Reims, which in France, I think I'm going to say this wrong. They pronounce it Reims or something like that.
Hmm.
And anyway, at that point, that's whenever we went to Normandy. And then
Okay.
I spent 2 full days in Normandy, which was not nearly enough time. But
And the beach, uh, how was it walking onto this beach? Now, I know today it's used as a normal beach, just as you
mhm,
kind of see as on the Jersey Shore.
yeah.
But yeah, can you describe what it was like to actually step foot on this beach?
So going to Omaha Beach and Sword Beach and Utah and Gold and Juneau, you you sit there and you look at it, and honestly, it's just a beach. It's a beach that's beautiful, just like hundreds of others throughout the world. But what gives it significance and what gives it weight is knowing what happened there. Um, it's just like any other, memento or anything like that. Um, some people, they might bring home a rock from a trip that they want. Well, it's a
Right.
rock. I mean, it's completely, um, you know, meaningless unless it's attached to an experience that you had at a particular place. So really, that's what Omaha Beach and Utah Beach and all those beaches along the Normandy coastline are. And whenever you whenever you have immersed yourself in the history prior to going, um, it's a pretty overwhelming feeling. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. I remember one of the trips that we're required to take as elementary school students in Pennsylvania is to Gettysburg.
Yeah.
And we go as sixth graders. And this is after learning about all the battles and the immense loss of life over the course of, I think it was only 3 or 4 days, the
Mhm.
amount of time it took to get there and building up to this big battle. And then after all of that, after maybe a month straight of learning about the Civil War, we go to Gettysburg. They make us run one of the fields that the Confederates had to run against the North, and they put it into perspective. They say only 1 out of 10 of you will make it out across this field,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh my god! It's sixth graders. We're like
Yeah.
12 years old.
Yeah.
And really, if you didn't know the history behind that, you would go there
It just looks
and
like a
it's a
field.
field. It's a field. Of course, at Gettysburg, yeah, they've got a lot of monuments there, but still, it's not going to have that weight of memory
Mm-hmm.
that it would have if excuse me, if you know the history behind it.
Yeah, and so part of that, understanding the history of D-Day and what happened there, and then seeing the beach. So something that I saw everybody's seen a million times depicted
Hmm.
in pop culture, movies, TV shows
Right.
is from the American perspective of being on the boats, landing on the beach, and then essentially having to fight their way to the bank before they can make their way towards the bunkers. And
Right.
that short, I don't want to call it short, but that distance between the water and where you have that embankment uh, was where Americans lost their lives in significant numbers.
Yeah.
When I saw you go climb up around to the top of the beach and stand in the bunker of the Germans and
Yeah.
see the beach with the this almost bird's eye view, this perfect layout of the beach, it made perfect sense how they were able to cause so much damage to the American
Yeah.
troops as they stormed that beach. I could not believe it. That was the first time I've ever seen it from the perspective of the Nazis, and they had the perfect vantage point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really, that's why that particular place at well, at least at Omaha, was so highly defended because if you look to the east and you look to the west, and I'm just specifically talking about Omaha here, it's it's bluffs straight up.
Yeah.
So the German army knew, or Rommel was the guy who was placed in charge of constructing the Atlantic Wall. They knew that nobody was going to land there. There was no chance. But you get to Omaha Beach or Utah Beach, well then it kind of flattens out and it provides a place where an invasion force could land. And yeah, you get up there and you look at it from the German perspective. Well, I was at Point du Hoc with my wife. So the story behind Point du Hoc is there were several. Um, Point du Hoc is a place that kind of juts out into the English Channel, and the Germans had placed some large caliber guns there that had to be taken out on D-Day. What the Americans didn't know is that the Germans had actually withdrew those guns prior to the invasion. Um, but they sent in the U.S. Army Rangers, and they were going to have to scale these cliffs in order to take this particular position. And I stood there at the edge of the cliff, and I looked at my wife, and I said, "How did we win? I don't understand how these men did it. I know the stories. I've read them. I've watched the documentaries. I've seen the movie adaptations. I don't know how they did it."
Yeah.
other than just sheer will and guts.
And was it numbers? Was it overwhelming them with our numbers and how many men came onto the beach and they just couldn't hold us off?
Yeah, yeah. So that was definitely a big part of it. At Utah Beach, the Americans actually landed off course and landed in the wrong spot. Had they landed where they were supposed to at Utah, it would have been much worse. So
Wow.
casualties were uh, quite a bit um, quite a bit less on Utah. Omaha was a slaughter, and they just kept coming. As a matter of fact, Omar Bradley, who was in command of the U.S. forces there, almost called off the uh, the landings there at Omaha because it was just an absolute slaughter there.
Wow.
It's really interesting. I know I haven't seen a whole lot of documentaries, but I do like watching historical films or historical adaptations.
Mhm.
So like Dunkirk was a really interesting perspective from the
Yes.
English bringing basically pedestrian boats over to try to rescue as many people as they could because there
Yeah.
weren't enough military vessels to bring them home. And they were basically trapped on that beach, surrounded on every front. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about World War II, which took place and I think was a major impact in us winning, and maybe I often think about how like the Utah beach landing it appeared to be an accident, but maybe it wasn't because of Enigma. That
Mhm.
I don't know if you remember that Alan Turing
Yes.
basically creating and breaking the Nazi passwords or codes
Right.
for encryption and not telling anyone until what was that, the 80s? It was like 40 or 50 years before anyone knew that the German encryption had been broken.
Yeah, I can't remember when it was disclosed, like all of the details about Turing's role in it. But but yeah, that definitely saved a lot of lives.
Yeah, but they couldn't save too many, otherwise it would have been known that they had the encryption.
Exactly, exactly.
So it was
Yeah, that
just enough to turn the tide.
right, right. Um, yeah, I actually I can't remember what episode it is now, but in Chicago at the Museum of Science and Industry, they have a German U-boat that was captured. Anyway, I go there and see the U-boat and everything like that. But they have one of those Enigma machines there.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty
Oh, that's
fascinating.
awesome.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go see that. I have family in Chicago, but I've never been to the museum. Oh, I
Oh yeah,
did go to
it's
the museum once, but we weren't there for a vast amount of time.
okay. Yeah, it's a fascinating place.
Yeah.
So where else significant to World War II did you visit in France and Belgium that you want to talk about?
Um, so I went to, like I said, Americans would pronounce it Reims, Reims, um, and got to stand in the room where the terms of surrender were signed to
Wow.
end hostilities. Now there was a second signing that took place the next day that involved the Soviets, but the initial one that ended the hostilities took place right there in Reims. Um, so that was another place. Um, and also, we've already mentioned the Easy Company foxholes there outside of the town of Foy.
Real quick before
Yeah, sure.
we, can you give a brief summary of Easy Company and who they were and
Oh
why
yeah,
they were so significant to the war? And because a lot of your videos are tracing their steps, right?
yeah, sure. I kind of forget that sometimes, I'm a bit of a history nerd, and maybe not everybody is,
Right,
you
right.
know, quite
Uh,
quite as in the weeds
I
as
don't
what
know
I
all the
am.
lingo.
Yeah. So the history of Easy Company. A company is made up of about three platoons. So you're looking at roughly about 100 men. Um, this is a company that was in the 101st Airborne. They were one of the first of the parachute infantry regiments. So, you know, um, paratroopers. And it was there were hundreds of these guys that fought. This particular company, their story was picked up by an author named Stephen Ambrose, and he ended up kind of telling their story. They started off training in Toccoa, Georgia. As a matter of fact, I've just released a video today where I go to Toccoa. In the next video, I'll be showing like where they actually trained and go up the mountain that they ran up and down and things like that. Um, but they landed behind enemy lines, behind Utah Beach on D-Day, um, and I'm trying to condense all of this so that I don't get too deep in the weeds here. Long story short, they fought in Normandy, and then they had a second combat jump in Holland in September of 1944. And then in December of 44, whenever the Germans were making this big push into the Allied lines to try and, you know,
Separate the
basically
two, right?
they were trying to separate the two. They were trying to get to a place called Antwerp in Belgium, which was a deep water port. Um, well, the 101st got sent in to this area called Bastogne, where all of these roads come together, and basically got surrounded by the Germans. And of course, Easy Company was one of these. They were under the leadership of a man by the name of Dick Winters, who is just an outstanding example of a leader. Uh, anyway, from the Battle of the Bulge, then went into Germany and really kind of ended the war at Hitler's Eagle's Nest in Berchtesgaden. So anyway, Stephen Ambrose, picked up this story, wrote a book about this one company, and then that story was picked up by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, and they developed it into this HBO series in like '98. I'm wanting to say called Band
Wow.
of Brothers.
It's that
Uh,
old, huh?
it
Wow.
is, no, wait, I'm sorry. It was 2001. So it was filmed in the late '90s, I think. I could be wrong on that, but I think it aired on HBO in 2001. Um, and still holds up today. I mean, that to me, it's one of the greatest uh, series ever done. So anyway, that's really what brought a lot of attention to Easy Company. They're what they did was amazing, but they're really kind of a representation of thousands of other men who fought in that war.
Okay. Yeah, he for those of you that are from Central PA listening to this, Dick Winters was actually born in New Holland, PA, and he moved to Hershey after the war and lived there for a long time. And actually, he's kind of from the Lancaster, Ephrata region, but then ended up, one of my friends from college actually used to see him and help him. And he actually ended up dying, I think, 9 years ago in a facility in Campbelltown, which is 10 minutes from where I live right now. And it was just so wild to know that someone so impactful in World War II was from this area. And there are memorials all over the place for him. There are bridges named after him. It is really cool to know that history and see that representation in Band of Brothers.
Yeah, and really, the reason that I hit a lot of those sites, one is just my own personal interest. I've read all the books. A lot of those men ended up writing memoirs about their experience in the war. Dick Winters wrote his own book, Shifty Powers, um, Babe Heffer and Bill Gardner. A lot of those guys wrote about their experiences, and I've read about them. Um, but I like to focus on those sites just because of the popularity of Band of Brothers. That kind of served as a gateway for a lot of people to start learning about World War II
Right.
and what these men did.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like you said when we were talking about D-Day, or Omaha Beach, it's the context, right? And
Mhm.
so there is a lot of context because of Band of Brothers into some of these sites, and yeah, it's always fascinating to me to go to somewhere like Europe and walk amongst the cities and villages and forests and just feel the history there, and they
Yeah,
just live amongst it every day. It's very
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. Well, whenever we were there, we stayed in this old 16th century French manor, And we're staying in a place um, that also had significance during World War II, but is older really than anything that you would see in America, and it's for them it's a bed and breakfast. So it's
Right, right.
yeah. We don't know what old is over here.
No,
No,
no.
not a
We have
clue.
no
No,
concept of it.
Ellie, I think I've told this, I think, a bunch of times now. I was in Abu Dhabi traveling with my wife, and he asked me. I was checking into the hotel, and he asked me
Huh.
how I enjoyed the city of Abu Dhabi, and I was like, it's beautiful. Everything's brand new. The architecture is amazing. It's like this modern city, and I was like, where I'm from in Philadelphia, everything's older. And he's like, yeah, where I'm from in Egypt, everything's really old too. And I was just like, you got me beat there.
That's good.
Yeah, it puts it into context a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Bob, you know this story, but I don't know if I've ever told this part of it. So I will say it again. I did 4 months in Bonn, Germany as part of a study abroad.
Oh,
And
cool.
just south of Bonn is Remagen along the Rhine. And Remagen, I remember visiting the last bridge across the Rhine, and there's a museum there that you can see basically all of this stuff, understand the history of what happened there. And the bridge is no longer there, actually, but they talk about that was the last crossing, the last physical crossing that was not destroyed across the Rhine to keep the front moving.
Yeah. Yeah. So, kind of an interesting story with that. I was going to go to that bridge whenever I was there, but just simply didn't have the time. That's going to be something for a return trip.
Yeah.
Uh, in addition to the History Traveler series on the YouTube channel, I have another series called Echoes of War, where I've had this project where I've been going around and interviewing World War II veterans. And I've got a few of those interviews that are posted. One of these days, I'm going to get more on the channel. But there's a gentleman that I interviewed who fought in the Battle of the Bulge at St. Vith in Belgium. Uh, Long story short, his platoon was placed on rear guard security as the Germans were advancing. So, in other words, they were put in charge of holding the Germans off while the rest of the outfit withdrew. And he ended up getting taken prisoner. So I've got his story. You can watch that whole entire interview uncut on the channel.
Wow.
In one of those uh, episodes, what's it called? My gosh, it's my channel. You think I would remember the name of it? I think it's called Battle of the Bulge in Saint Vith. Um, I worked with a local historian there. We went through tons of documents, old maps, morning reports, and everything like that. Long story short, we found the patch of woods where he was captured, and I go to that spot and then call him from there and have him kind of guide me around and say, okay, no, there was kind of is at the edge of a field, or there was more of an open set of woods. And we found the old foxholes where his platoon was
Wow.
at. But anyway, to
Wow.
bring this all back around to Remagen, um, after he was captured, um, he was marched across the bridge there at Remagen, um, and spent the duration of the war as a prisoner of the German army.
Wow.
Amazing story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I can't believe he was able to. I mean, I guess I can too, that he was able to tell you where to go and he remembered it enough
The,
to
this
direct you over the phone.
this man's memory is phenomenal. Um, so I consider him a good friend now. He's 96 right now,
Wow.
but I at the time that I did the interviews with him, I think he was 93,
Okay.
and it took a while for me to convince him to let me interview him on film.
Yeah.
Because even all these years later, it's fresh. And I made the comment to him. I said, Reed, I said, man, I said, don't take this the wrong way. I said, but you're in your 90s and your memory is phenomenal. Like he can tell you, um, on September 22nd, our unit got the call to roll out. We went up to this place in Holland. I mean, he can tell you just all these details. And I said, your memory is phenomenal. and he kind of teared up and he said, "When you see the things that I saw, you don't forget it."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
If there's anything we know about memory, it is a memory is much stronger when it's tied to emotion.
Yeah. 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 And really kind of bring that full circle. You go to these places, and whenever you have other people's memories of these places, they're not your memories. Obviously, you weren't there. I
Yeah.
wasn't at the Battle of the Bulge. I wasn't at Normandy. But whenever you have other people's memories and you can empathize with that, um, that's what makes the history real. And
Mm-hmm.
it's what I try and do with the channel. It's one thing to read it in a book. Um, the next level is to um,
Just to
maybe
feel it.
have somebody tell you about it, or show you pictures, or show you video of their experience, and then the um, probably the most impactful level is to experience it for yourself or see it
Yeah.
for yourself. Yeah.
Empathy is probably one of the most powerful tools that we have.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Wow. So where did you go? Where else did you go?
So on that particular trip, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
So on that particular trip, I also saw some of the German defenses along their border that they had built. Those are still there today. Went to a few cemeteries. I'm not sure if you're familiar with something called the Malmedy Massacre,
No.
but
No.
during the Battle of the Bulge, there was everything was just absolutely chaotic there. And um, long story short, there was a unit of German SS troops that bumped up with a group of Americans and ended up taking them prisoner. I say taking them prisoner. They ended up lining them up and just massacring them right there on the spot. So anyway, I went to the place where these U.S. troops were killed, and went and visited some of their graves. Um, yeah, and I was wanting to hit some World War I places on that trip, but those plans kind of fell through on me inadvertently. So
Yeah, World War I is something that I often get confused with World War II,
mhm.
and I often mix up who the actual uh, teams, if you will, the
Yeah.
allies versus the who were the enemies, who were I don't even know who the United States forces typically fought with,
Mhm.
but even the technology was vastly different
Oh yeah,
from 20 years later.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So World War I was just exceptionally nasty, uh, just in the style of fighting that they were doing, and you're really seeing the first truly modern war at that point. So we're seeing machine guns for the first time. We're seeing tanks. We're seeing aerial combat, for the first time. Um, and you can still go there and see the remnants of those old trenches. The one thing that really separates World War I from World War II, probably, if I'm just getting it down to the most generalized level, is World War I was more of a static war. There wasn't a whole lot of movement. It's all right there in northern France and southern Belgium, and they just kind of dug down into those trenches um, and stayed there. What was the movie? Wow, this is awful.
1917.
Yes, 1917
1917.
Incredible
is
movie.
is probably one of the better World War I
Okay.
movies that's ever been
That
made.
was
That is on my list. I have not seen it yet.
Yeah,
I really like that movie. Yeah.
yeah, and again, you read the memoirs of the men who fought in that conflict. Um, and I haven't had an opportunity to go to any of the places. I was supposed to go. I actually was in Verdun,
Hmm.
but um, this is an area where my lack of preparation and my lack of research really kind of bit me in the butt. Um, After we left Belgium, we went down to Verdun. So this was in February. This is right before the Earth shut down. Um, so we go to Verdun, and I got there probably 8 o'clock at night, And we thought, oh, we'll just drop in, we'll get a motel, and next day go to Verdun, see all the things there that there is to see. Um, it turns out that in France, at least at that time of year, in some places, it's not like the United States where there's somebody working 24 hours a day, in a hotel. They had shut down, and like the whole city was shut down. Gas stations were shut down. Um, the motels were shut down. We did find one place that had like you could enter a credit card, and then it would spit out your key. Um, my credit card wouldn't work in that area, so we were
Nice.
making phone calls saying, what's going on? Why is my card not working? The credit card company saying, no, everything's fine. Um, Went through that. It turns out that I guess the local merchant in that area just didn't accept the card. So that's why I didn't do Verdun. We ended up just having to leave because I was going to have to spend the night in my car otherwise. But
Are you making plans to travel to other parts of the world for either World War I or World War II? And specifically, do you have any plans to do the Pacific? Because as I told you, as I mentioned, I'm into that one right now. And as I'm watching it and thinking about this conversation that we're going to have together, I wanted to ask you. I mean, some of these islands are very remote.
yeah,
What is it, Palau?
Peleliu.
Peleliu,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah,
it would be an incredible trip to be able to experience those island nations now.
yeah. So Peleliu is quite high on my list of places to go, and um, the series that you're mentioning, the Pacific, is part of that reason. Um, so that particular part of the series is based in part on a book written by a man named Eugene Sledge called With the Old Breed.
I read that. Yeah.
Oh, you read it? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
In my opinion, hands down, it's the best World War II memoir ever written.
Really?
Um, yeah, anybody that asks me, I always point them to that book.
Huh.
Um, but I really like to go to Peleliu, and I would really like to go. I want to go to Okinawa, um, but I've been talking with a guy who's over there right now, and he said that it's so built up that a lot of the battleground is lost over
Mm.
there. There's still a few things that you can see, but not as much as what
What about
I was
Iwo
hoping.
Jima?
I do want to go to Iwo Jima. The problem with Iwo Jima is access. So I've got to find the right person or the right hook up there because you can't just go. Um, but oh my gosh, I would love to go to Iwo Jima. Um,
What are your
but
thoughts on those films that Clint Eastwood did, The Letters from Iwo Jima and then Flags of Our Fathers?
yeah, I thought those were both really good movies.
Yeah.
I I enjoyed both of those, immensely.
I remember when
Um,
they first came out, because they're both basically competing views. Basically, one side, American's perspective and a Japanese perspective,
yes,
and they actually got more. They were more successful in Japan than they were in the United States.
yeah, I know that. If I remember correctly, Letters from Iwo Jima was supposed to be like the companion piece to Flags of Our Fathers,
Yeah,
and Letters from Iwo Jima ended up being kind of the more popular film,
yeah,
or the one that was more well received.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I have an uncle who has passed away that served on a destroyer and was at the Battle of Iwo Jima and was part of the pre-invasion bombardment of
Wow.
that battle. So yeah, I would really like to go there. The big issue with the Pacific, at least for me, that's the limiting factor. Is man, it's expensive
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get over to
Yeah,
those places.
yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
But you could
but
go to Hawaii
I I've never
and
been to
Midway.
Hawaii. Yeah, I
Yeah,
would.
Oh yeah, you have to do Hawaii. Yeah, I mean
yeah.
Pearl
Yeah.
Harbor is incredible.
That's one of the places I still
Yeah.
want to go. My mother's, I think her uncle or
Mhm.
great uncle was killed in the bombing at Pearl Harbor.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Holy smokes.
yeah.
Yeah, that was a sobering experience. I did that actually. I guess it was 2 years ago now, but
And that's the USS Arizona that's still in the bay.
still
Yes.
leaking oil. Actually,
Yep.
yeah, you can take a ferry. You take a ferry out to this platform, and you sort of overlook the sunken ship, and you can still see an oil sheen coming out of the boat and everything. And yeah, it was an incredible place to visit. I highly recommend it for every single person living in this country to go see that. If they
Well,
can.
and yeah, that's another one. I've never been to Hawaii, so and I told my wife wants to go to Hawaii, so we'll make it over there eventually. I told her I want to go to the the Pearl Harbor Memorial. I want to go to Pearl Harbor. I want to go see the USS Missouri. Maybe go to the U.S. Cemetery there, and then come home. As far as the idea of hanging out on the beach and taking in the sun, that doesn't
You might
do
have to
anything for me.
compromise. You might have to
Yeah.
compromise.
I know. Might give her a day to hang around on the beach. But and you talk about a lot of these places that for some people seem like out of reach. The idea of going to Europe or going to the Pacific. If you're interested in World War II, so I like the channel. I cover all kinds of different history, but World War II honestly is kind of a little bit more my wheelhouse. There are a lot of places right here in the U.S. that you can travel to that are just incredibly interesting. That you can really take a deep dive into the history.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the gap between us recording and this going live is going to be, but here in maybe next week, next week or maybe the week after, I was just up in Maine, and a lot of people don't know this, but the U.S. in preparation for a possible Nazi invasion of our eastern seaboard built a bunch of forts along the U.S. coastline, and you go there and it looks just like Normandy. I mean, there are these huge bunkers. There's observation posts. It's insane. I was completely blown away by what I saw, and it's in Maine, and it made me really want to explore some other
That's interesting.
areas like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I know there's a at least a naval base up in Maine that I'm familiar with that I've some coworkers that I know have been doing some work up there, and it's extremely tight security.
Mhm.
And I didn't even know there was really any kind of military presence up in Maine that
Yeah.
to that significance. Like it's a huge naval base.
Yeah, that so Portland was the home of the North Atlantic Fleet in World War II. So one of the areas that I go to, you think of World War II, taking place on these distant battlefields. There was a U-boat that sank a ship called the USS Eagle just 9 miles off the coast of Portland. Yeah, so I mean
What?
the front, as far as the
Wow.
Battle of the Atlantic, came right up to our shores, and
Wow.
and most
Well,
people don't know that.
well, and oh man, didn't they fly hot air balloons or something onto the West Coast and like burn portions of the forest
Yeah,
in the
that was
Pacific
the
Northwest?
Japanese. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another fascinating story from World War II.
That it also gets overlooked. Not many people realize that technically. I mean, I don't know if you want to call it a bombing, but yeah,
The,
they,
the Japanese actually um, occupied U.S. territory during World War II. Up in the Aleutian Island chain that I mentioned
Oh
earlier,
yeah.
where my grandpa was at, there were two islands called Attu and Kiska. Japanese took it over, and we had to fight and take it back.
Huh.
Yeah, but the idea was to come up that island chain, get into Alaska, and get a foothold on the North American continent.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I know San Francisco, the specifically near the Golden Gate Bridge, there's a fort that was built for the purposes of World War II, or was it was that built for a different war?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure on that one. I
Because
would have
I
to
remember there being
look
cannons,
that
but
up.
they looked like older cannons, not necessarily like howitzers. So I wasn't sure if it was. Oh no, there it is. Was of paramount importance during World War II. There we
Okay.
go. Yeah, so you can even see stuff there that was never used, but it was still built.
Yeah, yeah. There's all kinds of amazing things. One of the forts that I went to up in Maine, um, I mean, actually saw some action. They fired on a couple of U-boats and hit one of them. It's thought that they hit one of them, and then that one made it all the way down to about South Carolina, and then sank right there. So it actually fired its guns during the Second World War.
Wow.
Wow.
And
I had no idea.
the caretaker of the island told me an interesting story. He said they, later on they'd built some houses there and things like that. One of the residents of the island took a trip to Germany, and the name of the island is Cushing Island. He went into this bar in some town in Germany, had this T-shirt that said something 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 Cushing Island, and had a picture of it. And there was this old man in the bar that walked up to him and said, "Have you been to this place before?" And he said, "Oh, actually, I have a house there. Go stay there during the summer." And he said, I was on a U-boat during World War II, and we were positioned right off of Cushing Island. We ran up and down that coastline." Yeah, so he knew all about it.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty crazy.
That is so wild.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
I didn't mention that in the video because the guy didn't tell me until I was about to leave. Um,
Oh, that's so cool.
yeah, yeah. So again, it's again, if I didn't know those stories, yeah, it'd be a cool trip to an island.
Yeah,
But
right.
whenever
Right.
whenever you know the history behind a place, it to me it makes the travel that much more interesting and that much more meaningful. Um,
Wow.
That's
I
a
don't know if you guys have ever traveled to a place and then whenever you got home, you learned something about it and thought, "Oh my gosh, I wish I would have known about that whenever I was there."
All the time.
All the
see,
time.
that's a real reason why we do what we do now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a contributing factor to
Yep.
learn about these locations, because the history it just adds so much to to their significance. Something else that I found interesting too that I learned not too long ago about what we developed here for World War II is the intercoastal waterway.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that at all?
No, give me a rundown.
So, man, I don't know exactly when it was constructed, but I pulled it up here on Google. So, but it's 3,000 miles of waterway, like a water channel completed inland. So they said it's this man-made waterway that goes from Florida all the way up to Boston, Massachusetts. And this way they can run supplies during World War II without going into the open ocean.
I never heard of that. See, okay, so right here, this demonstrates another reason why I love doing these YouTube videos.
Yeah,
Is every time I post something, I'm learning something new.
Yep.
And which is kind of a misconception that some people have about the channel. I'll post something and they'll be like, "I can't believe you didn't include this," or "I can't believe you didn't know about that." Like, hey, I'm learning. I'm a
right.
lifelong learner, just like everybody.
Yeah. It's about
That's why
sharing what you know.
yeah, exactly.
So it starts. It was completed in 1949, June 18th, 1949. So it starts in the Anquiscom River, and it ends in Brownsville, and then it actually connects through the Gulf to Texas. But yeah, I learned
Fascinating.
about that not too long ago, and then Elliot and I ended up on a layover in Florida, and we actually sat at a restaurant that
Yep. Yeah, we did.
right on the intercoastal highway or intercoastal waterway. So
I've got a topic for another video.
there
Yeah.
you go. Yeah, you could sail the intercoastal waterway one of these
Yes.
days. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. Yeah. So
Before we do anything, Bob, I do want to mention that the one of the most interesting things that I've saw while I was traveling around Europe during my study abroad was the concentration camps. If there's anything that World War II has left an impact on, it is those camps. And the one camp that really struck me and it gave me a really sobering perspective on the war and gave me some additional insight, beyond Schindler's List style perspective, was Dachau outside of Munich. And I remember walking through there. I think I spent about 2 hours, and the entire time just having this pit in my stomach, not knowing how anything like this could happen.
Yeah, I've been to Dachau. Now that was on one of the student trips that I led, so it was before I had the YouTube channel or anything. Um, Probably one of the heaviest and most haunting places
Yeah.
I've ever been.
Yeah.
Um, the day that we were there, it was I don't know why we were about the only ones there. I think there was one other couple, and my group was relatively small. I think there were 15 in that group. Um, so we just like walk in, and everybody just kind of scattered and did their own thing for a couple of hours. Um, but but to go into that gas chamber and stand there, um, again, knowing what happened there,
Yeah.
it, it brings a heaviness to it, for sure.
Yeah. To put it lightly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that a band of brothers brought to my attention actually regarding gas chambers was that uh, U.S. soldiers were some of the first people to ever discover their existence.
Yeah.
And I guess, we knew what was going on, but not in the detail, not in the full scope that it was actually happening. And man, watching that and knowing that, although it's a scripted TV show, that this actually happened, and that these young men, after brutally fighting their way up to into Germany, stumble upon these concentration camps and see these people in the condition they were in, and they describe the smell and
Mhm.
just the nature of the place.
Yeah.
And what I learned about the concentration camps is that they were built even before World War II started. They were there basically as soon as Hitler got elected in 33, and he started
Mm.
building these camps for prisoners, for they were even for physically disabled, mentally disabled, gay, and people that opposed him. And
Yeah.
then it was used as Jewish concentration camps.
Yeah. Yeah. Then, yeah, whenever oh, yeah, like late 30s, early 40s is whenever they really started cranking up that program.
Yeah.
And so again, now we're tapping into another reason why I love studying history. Um, one of the most unfortunate things that I come across all the time, um, are, people find out, my connections with history or, whatever. And it's not uncommon for me to hear people say, "Oh my gosh, I hated history whenever I was in school." And within about 2 or 3 questions, I can kind of figure out why. And it's they came into class, they opened a book, they read a section, they took a quiz, and then they moved on to the next thing. And it's just like the most dry, um, emotionless presentation of history. I mean, I would have
Yeah.
hated history, if I had been taught that way.
Yeah,
I
it's
had some
just
classes where I
content
thought
for
that way.
content's sake to get through a curriculum. It's not with the intent of trying to teach.
Yeah, but whenever you start learning about history, what you're really learning about is human nature.
Hmm.
Um, and in things like the Holocaust, you're kind of tapping into some of the darker elements of human nature. Now there was stuff going on in the Pacific theater with the Japanese that that was equally horrific. Um, in the city of Nanking, in China, whenever the Japanese went in there, it's there's a book by Iris Chang that details what the Japanese did, and it's so awful that I don't even want to repeat it on your podcast. Just to give you some context, though, there was a Nazi ambassador in China. Things were so bad with what the Japanese were doing, with what they were doing to the Chinese, that the Nazi was wiring back to Germany, "Hey, there are some awful things happening here." Um, so whenever it's shocking to the Nazi, you you know that it's bad. And
Yeah.
I've done interviews with World War II veterans, who served in the Pacific Theater, who were personal witnesses of what the Imperial Japanese Army did to the the local populations, and it's awful. So anyway, kind of getting back to that thing with human nature. Um, there's another book. It's called Ordinary Men, and it's about this reserve police battalion in Germany, that was basically a part of the extermination of the Jews in the East. Um, these guys were not hardened Nazis. They were not part of the SS. None of that. These were regular guys who got called up into service, who were school teachers, who were bankers, who were, um, just regular businessmen. Um, and when put in a certain situation, found themselves doing some very awful things. And really, to me, whenever you look at history, um, and you look at what humans are capable of, it serves as a warning to all of us. Hey, be careful how you live,
Mm-hmm.
because even the best of us, put in the right scenario, might find yourself doing some awful things if you're not really paying attention. And the Holocaust is a tragic memorial to that.
Yeah. I mean, if Hitler did anything right, it was being inspirational and motivational for people to do those horrific things.
Yeah, and I mean, really, just um, was the wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hitler, in any other historical context, if you take Hitler and you place him in 1950, or you place him in 2005 or whatever, Hitler's a non-entity. He's not a factor. But he found himself in just, whether you want to say right place at the right time or wrong place at the wrong time, took advantage of a tragic situation that Germany was in, and capitalized on it and destroyed his own country.
Yeah. Yeah, and Germans still, from my time there, they still don't really like talking about it and still feel
No,
guilty about it.
yeah, yeah. That'll I think that'll take another few generations
Yeah.
to shake. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but it's important to learn about those things, though.
Here's we're nearing the end of the podcast, but something, this is more of a philosophical question, I guess, in
Yeah,
a
sure.
way, or something that I want to ask you. How do you see, as far as world wars go, or international conflict, do you ever see anything like that happening again?
No, I don't think so. Now, if we end up having World War III, you can't come back and blame me and say, "Well, you were wrong." But I I think with the introduction of nuclear weapons, I think that may have brought an end to the big, large scale world wars. Um, anything that we've seen since then has been really localized conflicts.
Yeah.
The Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Soviet-Afghan War. Okay, everything has been more localized. I'm not sure what it would take to get into a global conflict.
Right.
So, I mean, earlier this year, there was a hashtag going around, World War III. I think is in the context of Iran.
It was.
Um,
Right.
yeah, but I wasn't really worried of a third world war breaking out.
No.
That's good. That's good. I like to hear that.
So far, 2020 is not over yet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we still have a few months to go.
What did I hear about 2020? I think Amanda was sharing this with me. That I thought it was quite comical. Is that if 2020 were a bath bomb, it'd be a toaster.
Yep. that makes perfect sense.
I found that very funny.
Yeah.
All right, Bob, you ready for some rapid fire?
Yeah, so JD, at the end of
Yeah.
every podcast, we do these rapid fire questions. Now, I do want to admit that we're in the process of, I think, tweaking a few.
Okay.
So We're going to run through them now. There's 12 questions. Just
Sure.
quickly, or take as much time as you want. It doesn't really matter. There are no
All right.
rules to this.
All right. I'll try and be as rapid with them as I can.
All right. Bob, I'll start with these.
Okay.
So what is the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word travel?
Adventure.
What home comfort do you miss the most while traveling?
The first thing that came to my mind was barbecue sauce.
Yeah, you
Hey.
can't get that in France. It's not going to be. You're in Missouri,
It's
man.
gonna be very
Yeah,
different.
that makes total sense.
That's not going to be Missouri barbecue sauce,
No,
that's for sure.
Yeah.
No.
It may be the answer to your next question, though. If you could swim in any liquid, what would it be?
um, the quick answer there is barbecue sauce.
Okay.
I've already got it planted in my head now.
This is
If
one
you
of
can
our-
swim in barbecue sauce, you would be one of the best swimmers alive. I'd like
Yeah.
to see that. That'd be awesome.
I'm a terrible swimmer, so I'd probably drown in whatever liquid you put me in.
This is actually a new question. Who would win in a fight? An accountant or a banker?
Oh man, I'm gonna say that my gut says banker.
Okay.
Oh,
I think
all right,
so.
all right.
Yeah.
Would you rather drink wine or coffee for the rest of your life?
Coffee.
Yep.
Say hello in your favorite language.
Здравствуйте.
Is that Russian?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah,
All right, I'm picking
Я
up.
говорю по-русски немного. I speak Russian a little bit.
I like it. If you can travel with anyone in the world, living or dead, who would it be?
Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh, I like
Yeah.
it. River of Doubt
Yeah.
is an incredible book.
Yeah.
What is one item remaining on your bucket list?
Oh, wow. This is a cruel question to make it just one.
Well, we got to keep it short.
I really want to go to Berlin. I haven't been to Berlin.
Okay.
So that's pretty high on my list.
Yeah.
Who is your biggest celebrity crush?
My biggest celebrity crush. Holy smokes. Man, you have legitimately stumped me here.
There you go.
My biggest
It
celebrity
could be a
crush.
historian.
It could be a historian. Could be a president. It could be a man too. It doesn't have to be in a
Okay, so if we're talking like in a male female attractive context, I'm going to say Grace Kelly. I don't know.
That's a good one. We
Yeah.
haven't had that one.
Yeah.
Did I ask that or did you? You asked that, Elliot.
I think I did.
Okay. If you were stuck in one city for the rest of your life, which city would you choose?
I really enjoyed my time in Kiev, Ukraine.
Oh, I have not been.
No.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one.
Again, that was all pre YouTube channel, but I've spent a lot of time there and really fell in love with that place.
Interesting.
Hence the Russian skills, those minor Russian skills. But
Yes. And if you owned a yacht, what would you name it?
let's see. If I owned a yacht, I think I would name it Broke.
Broke.
Because I think if I bought a yacht, I'd be broke after
Yes.
that.
And the very last question: if you wrote a novel, what would it be about?
If I wrote a novel, oh gosh, I'm going to be the stereotypical guy here. We've been talking about World War II. I would probably have something put against the backdrop of the Second World War.
I think it's appropriate. Yeah.
I think it's good. And JD, before we let you go, can you share all of your social media websites, handles, whatever you want people to find you on and review your content?
Yeah, sure. So the YouTube channel is youtube.com/The History Underground. And I'm also on Facebook at The History Underground. Instagram is at @the_history_underground. So those are the main ones that I'm active on.
All right.
Okay. Awesome. We really appreciate your time today. A lot. And I think judging from what you hinted at, it seems like you've traveled a lot more than we got into today. So we may have to get you back on
Yeah.
to do this again sometime, especially as you continue to grow your page and you travel more. We'd love to have you on, man,
Yeah.
and go over it with you.
I would love that. Yeah, one of my big goals is I want to take some people with me over to Normandy, and do a group trip. I think that would be fun.
I think that'd be a great idea. And I would
Absolutely.
love to attend. Thank you for
Yes,
the invitation.
yes,
Invitation's
yes.
open.
And hey man, and the invitation's also open for you when you come to Philly to check out the history here. Already know we have a ton of it, so
Yeah.
let us know and we'll link up and show you around and enjoy the city together.
Yeah, let's plan on it.
All right.
Thanks, JD.
Thank you.
This was incredible to me, this conversation, because I've already had the idea to do something similar, and I'm sure a lot of people have. And, anyone interested in history and travel together, especially, probably consider traveling to those locations to retrace and actually experience locations that are just so important to the culture and history of this country. And so the beach of Normandy, the D-Day location is just a huge place to see, and I can't wait to do that myself. And then concentration camps are another one that I want to experience. And now that I have a daughter, and obviously I want to just feed her everything that I'm passionate about and hope that she's as passionate about those things as me, but I would hope that when she gets to an age that she's interested in this stuff, because I would love to be able to experience that with her and my wife, and take her to concentration camps. And it sounds like a weird thing to do, but I'm sure you understand, from a learning perspective. Right. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to doing that one day. And it was really cool to hear how he did it.
Yeah. And going to a historical location is way more impactful than learning about it from a movie, from a textbook. And I mentioned it in the episode, but just in 6th grade, going to the Battle of Gettysburg and reenacting some of those battles that occurred and feeling what it was like to be a Confederate soldier versus a Northern soldier, it makes such a lasting impact. And I still talk about that to this day, which is how impactful it truly was. So it is really interesting. And it's not just American history, like going into different countries and truly knowing what you're looking at makes your experience so much greater.
Yeah, and that's why, it's important to do the research. And I mean, not to do like a self-promo right now, but that's kind of how we got into this to begin with. And that's sort of the driving factor behind our consulting service, because we want to help you understand the place and do the research and understand the landmarks that you're going to visit before you go. So when you step there and you're standing in front of whatever it may be, or standing on the sand of, the beach of Normandy, you know what happened there. You don't need to whip out your phone or learn it there. Already, and you can really kind of immerse yourself in that experience.
Yeah. It definitely helps build anticipation.
For sure, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for listening to this episode of The Traveler's Blueprint. If you love the show and you want a way to support us, you can do one or two things, or both of them. The first would be financial. You can support us for as little as $1 a month through our Patreon, and that is the lowest level that you can support us. If you want to support us more, that would be wonderful. And that is less than a cup of coffee. It is unbelievably low, and it just helps us pay for our software costs, pay for our subscriptions to help produce the show, and it goes into producing a better show ultimately. The other non-financial way is to simply support us on our social media pages or leave us a review on whichever podcast platform you listen on. And lastly, to every one of our listeners, you are really our biggest advocate. And we appreciate every single one of you that listens to us. We know we have some hardcore fans out there, and we really appreciate you. And we appreciate you sharing this. Word of mouth is the best form of advertisement, and we know you've been doing a great job because we've continued to grow. So thank you, and tune in next week.